In the burnt patron stillness of the late dry season, where the African savanna sleeps under a sky too big to hold memory, a dog waited. Not just any dog, a German shepherd named Coda, who climbed the same ridge every evening at dusk. For 10 years he sat on that hill, unmoving, eyes fixed on a road no one else watched. Locals said he was waiting for a ranger who never returned. But they didn't know the story. Not really. This isn't just about a dog who waited. It's about loyalty that defied instinct, time, and reason. So before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe for more true stories like this, and tell us where you're watching from. Let's see how far Coda's story reaches. The sun was falling low over the hills of Savo Reserve when Jamal Carter, a 32-year-old wildlife ranger, paused mid-patrol, the twilight heat clinging to his shirt like sweat. The air buzzed with cicadas and the rustle of dry brush as he walked the perimeter fence, boots crunching on gravel. Something felt off. It wasn't the sound, more the absence of it. That eerie silence that settles in moments before something is found. Then it came, a faint whimper, weak, fractured, barely audible under the whistle of wind. He stopped, turned his head. Another cry, shorter now, strangled by pain. Jamal dropped to a crouch, eyes scanning the wire lines separating the reserve from illegal poacher territory. That's when he saw the glint wire, tight and rusted, twisted cruelly around a patch of scrub. He moved carefully, voice low, easy. As he got closer, his stomach turned. In the dim light, a small bundle of fur lay tangled in brush and steel. A German shepherd pup no more than 12 weeks old, its left hind leg grotesquely constricted in a steel snare. Blood matted the fur and the pup trembled in shock, eyes wide with feral fear. "Damn," Jamal whispered, heart racing, not from fear but the rush of compassion and fury. Poachers had left snares even this close. He shed his outer jacket, moved slowly toward the pup, murmuring like he would to it. The pup growled, lips lifting slightly over baby fangs. But it didn't move. It couldn't. Jamal could see the infection already setting in the swelling, the discoloration, the way the leg twitched out of sync. "You hold on, little soldier," he said gently as he cut through the wire with his folding blade. The pup shrieked once but fell silent again, limp in his arms as he wrapped it in the jacket. That night, Jamal didn't leave it with the reserve vet. He stayed. He cleaned the wound himself, sat on the cold concrete beside the clinic table while the vet administered antibiotics, and carefully stitched muscle back into shape. The pup was unconscious most of the time, but when it awoke midnight the fear flared again. It bared teeth, snarled. Jamal didn't flinch. He reached his hand out slowly. Then the pup bit, a sharp snap of jaws into the flesh of Jamal's wrist, not deep but committed. Jamal hissed softly in pain but didn't pull back. "You're allowed," he whispered. "You scared," the arm bleeding, letting the pup gnaw a few seconds longer before exhaustion overtook it. It whimpered once, loosened its jaw, and collapsed again. Jamal pressed gauze to the bite. Then he waited. The following morning the sun rose through the cracked blinds, casting long amber lines across the clinic floor. The pup stirred. This time, when it opened its eyes and saw Jamal still there, still unmoving, something shifted. It didn't growl. Instead, it let out a low, guttural sigh, crawled clumsily on 3 legs across the table until it reached Jamal's boot, then lay against it, breathing hard. "You got a name?" Jamal asked quietly, reaching down. The pup didn't answer, of course, but when Jamal touched its head, it didn't pull away. "For Poached thinks." "Didn't seem right." "Coda," he said, "means friend in Dakota, I guess." Coda blinked once. Jamal stayed another night in that clinic, curled on a bench, while Coda slept on a folded blanket by the heater. From that moment, the bond was sealed not with tricks or training, but with silence, blood, and the language of shared survival. In the weeks that followed, Jamal took responsibility for Coda's recovery. He fashioned a splint from bamboo and medical wrap, carried the pup on his back during patrols, and fed it goat's milk mixed with rehydration. He talked to Coda constantly about poachers, about his late father, about jazz music, about silence, about how not every man was built to leave. Coda listened. His ears twitched when Jamal spoke, and sometimes, just sometimes, he tilted his head as if he understood. The vet warned Jamal he might not make it, the infection's deep, but Jamal shook his head. Nah, he will, he's already chosen to stay. On the 15th night, Kota stood on his own for the first time. Unsteady, wobbly, but proud. That same night, Jamal caught him staring out the window, as if taking stock of the world that had once tried to end him. And as Jamal stood behind him, watching the little silhouette press against the glass, he realized something else. He wasn't just saving a dog. He was saving himself. The days after Kota's recovery turned into weeks, and the bond between man and dog deepened, like roots crawling beneath dry soil, silent but unbreakable. By the third month, Kota had outgrown the makeshift splint, his gait steadier with each passing sunrise, his frame filling out with muscle and will. He wasn't just healing, he was transforming. And Jamal, ever the silent type, began speaking more, not to other rangers, not to tourists, but to Kota. He told him stories of Detroit winters and cracked pavement, of his mother's humming in the kitchen, and the way his father once stared into the sky for hours after coming home from war. He didn't say much either, Jamal had muttered one night, sitting on a log while Kota lay beside him. Guess we both come from men who spoke better in silence. That night, Jamal began the first of what would become their secret language. It started with a simple triple whistle, short, sharp, distinct. 1, 2, 3, like Morse code but without the dots. Kota, lying in tall grass, perked up. Jamal whistled again. Kota stood, tilted his head. A third time, this time paired with a new phrase. Slow and soft, easy soldier. The words hung in the air like a memory being born. Kota took a cautious step forward, eyes locked on Jamal, then sat, ears forward. Jamal smiled. That's right. You're not just any mutt, you're my soldier from that, like the military K9 routines Jamal had studied in textbooks. This was slower, more intuitive, more rooted in patience than pressure. He made Kota track his scent in the underbrush, hide small pouches in the dirt with clove oil and tobacco, bury empty bullet shells for the dog to locate. Each success was met with the phrase, easy soldier. Each failure wasn't punished, just paused, retried. And each time that triple whistle rang, Kota came. No hesitation. The other rangers noticed. What the hell you teaching that dog? One of them joked during lunch. Jamal just shrugged. I'm not teaching him, we're figuring it out together. As the rains returned, the reserve took on a new scent. Rich soil, rotting wood, life returning. With it came new tasks. Anti-poaching patrols near the southern border grew more frequent, especially after intel surfaced that smugglers had started moving contraband through the narrow canyons past Sector D. On a foggy morning in early August, Jamal took Kota on his first long-range patrol beyond the inner perimeter. Kota had grown fast now, nearly full-grown, dark mahogany coat gleaming under the light, his gait proud, his senses honed. They walked for hours, Jamal teaching him to pick out gunpowder residue, to distinguish between the scent of mule deer and livestock, to stay still when the wind shifted. Your nose is better than any GPS, Jamal whispered, as Kota locked onto the scent of an old trail laced with vehicle oil. But it was what happened on that ridge near the border that changed everything. They were moving through a dry ravine, Kota a few paces ahead, nose to the ground, when Jamal paused to adjust his boot. The heat was intense, the silence thick. Then, out of nowhere, a sharp hiss slithered through the air. Jamal didn't see it, he felt it. The warning came not from instinct, but from Kota. A guttural snarl erupted, followed by a violent leap that knocked Jamal sideways. He hit the ground hard, shoulder slamming into loose gravel as Kota landed in front of him, growling low. That's when he saw it. Coiled not 3 feet away, a puff adder, its scaled body tense. Head raised, fangs bared. Jamal's pulse spiked. One wrong step earlier and he wouldn't have made it back. Kota didn't lunge. He didn't need to. His growl alone froze the snake. Jamal, heart thudding in his throat, slowly pulled Kota back by the collar, whispering, "Easy, soldier." The snake, disturbed, slithered off into shadow. Jamal sat there for a moment, breath shallow, staring at the spot where he could have died. Then he looked at Kota. "You saved me," he whispered, voice rough. Kota just panted, tongue out, eyes calm. That night, back at camp, Jamal sat outside the tent, a bottle of water in one hand, the other resting on Kota's back. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Words had become secondary. Their communication was something more primal. The next few weeks were filled with drills, but they never felt like drills. More like dances. Kota would zig when Jamal zagged, pause when he paused, circle twice when he found something worth sniffing. And every time the triple whistle came, he responded like a soldier reporting for duty. Other rangers began to ask if they could work with him. "He's not ready yet," Jamal would reply, though the truth was simpler. Kota responded only to Jamal. Anyone else's voice was just noise. The unit commander raised eyebrows. "You turning that mutt into a legend or just a shadow?" "He's already both," Jamal answered. It was true. Kota had stopped being just a dog. He had become a part of Jamal's rhythm, a mirror, a sentinel that saw what no one else did. Not just in the terrain, but in Jamal himself. And in the quiet hours when the moon hung low over the thorn trees, Jamal would sometimes lie beside Kota under the stars and whisper stories about fear. About how he almost didn't take the ranger job. About the day his father came home from war and didn't say a word for 3 days. About how Kota's bite scar still itched sometimes. And how it reminded him that love wasn't always soft. And Kota, in his own way, listened, ears twitching, body still, the way soldiers stay quiet when the truth is too big for language. In those moments, the night didn't feel as heavy. The past didn't feel as close. And the future hadn't yet betrayed them. The days after the near snakebite encounter brought Jamal and Kota closer than ever, as if their silent contract had been signed not with ink, but instinct. Patrols grew longer, training more complex, but the trust between man and dog never faltered. Jamal began taking notes for a possible training manual, one not based on traditional canine tactics but on intuition, empathy, and the rhythm of shared pain. He even started dreaming of what it could mean to officially register Kota into the elite canine division, something unheard of for a dog without pedigree or prior handler. But none of that mattered. Kota wasn't just service material, he was home. That's why when the letter arrived, printed in clinical black font on crisp white paper, Jamal didn't read past the first line before the knot formed in his stomach. "Officer Jamal Carter, you are hereby reassigned to Etosha National Reserve, Namibia, effective immediately." The second line struck harder. Assignment duration indefinite. Companion animals not permitted under current protocol. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a command issued by men behind desks hundreds of miles away. Men who had never walked 6 hours through heat with sand in their boots or slept on forest floors with only the breath of a dog to keep them grounded. Jamal read the letter again and again, but it never changed. The deadline was 4 days. He sat in silence for most of that night, the paper folded tightly in his hands. Kota lay nearby, head on his paws, occasionally glancing over as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "They're sending me away," Jamal finally whispered. Kota didn't move. Jamal leaned forward, rubbed a hand over his face, and "They said you can't come." That's when Kota rose, walked to him, and pressed his head against Jamal's knee. The rest of the night was spent in stillness. No training, no commands, just silence. On the second day, Jamal tried to argue. He wrote letters, made calls, pleaded with his supervisor, even offered to take unpaid leave to figure out a solution. But policy was policy. "Carter, I know it's tough," the voice on the other end of the phone had said, "but that dog will be fine. We'll assign him a new handler, he's just an animal." Jamal didn't reply. He ended the call without a word. By the third day, the packing began. Not that he had much: uniforms, notebooks, a worn photograph of his mother tucked in a Bible, and the frayed leash he'd never really used with Kota. The dog didn't need one. He followed, always. Except this time he wouldn't. Jamal couldn't bring himself to explain what was happening, not in words. So he did the only thing he could. He kept the routine. Same wake-up time, same walk to the ridge. Same triple whistle, "Easy, soldier," he said every time Kota came close, his voice lower now, like something inside him was wilting. On the final morning, the air felt different. There was no birdsong, no wind, just a heavy, humid stillness. Jamal slung his duffel over his shoulder and stepped outside. Kota wasn't at the door. That, more than anything, broke him. But as he walked the narrow dirt path to the northern exit, the same one they had patrolled together hundreds of times, he saw it, Kota, standing perfectly still at the top of the rise, the hill they always stopped at to watch the sun dip below the trees. His ears were up, body steady, eyes fixed on Jamal. He didn't bark, he didn't move, he didn't whine or tilt his head. He just watched. Jamal paused. The silence between them was thicker than any farewell. He took a step forward, then another, and then stopped. "I don't know how to leave you," he said quietly, not sure if he was speaking to Coda or to the aching part of himself that already felt empty. Coda blinked once. A breeze moved through the grass, but the dog remained like a statue carved from earth and loyalty. Jamal's hands tightened on the duffel strap. He wanted to run to him, fall to his knees, tell him he'd come back, promise it wouldn't be forever, but even lies felt disrespectful now. Instead, he raised his hand. One slow wave. "Easy, soldier," he said one last time, and then he turned. He didn't look back, but he felt it. Jamal climbed in, his throat dry, his chest hollow. As the Jeep rolled forward, he glanced once in the side mirror. Coda was still there, still watching. That image seared into his memory deeper than any scar. The hill, the dog, the stillness, and that silence, that terrible, perfect silence that said everything a man and a dog could never say out loud. As the Jeep disappeared around the bend, dust swirling in its wake, Coda finally sat down, not because he was tired, but because watching was all he had left. The days after Jamal's departure folded into each other like pages from a book someone had stopped reading too early. Life at the reserve moved forward. As it always did, patrol schedules resumed. Radio calls crackled through static. Tourists arrived and left in Land Cruisers plastered with dust. But something had shifted, something small but palpable. A rhythm had been broken. A presence had weight. Coda, once the shadow that moved beside Jamal's every step, now drifted through the compound like a ghost that didn't know where to haunt. On the first morning without Jamal, he waited by the tent until mid-morning, ears twitching at every bootstep. When the sun hit its highest point and Jamal didn't return, he walked to the shade beneath the mapane tree near the fence and lay down. He didn't eat. A young ranger named Daniel tried to feed him. Crouching low, hand outstretched, holding a piece of grilled meat still warm from the canteen stove. Coda didn't snarl. He didn't retreat. He simply turned his head away. By sunset, the meat had gone cold, and Daniel walked off shaking his head. "Stubborn thing," he muttered. But the next day, the same thing happened, and the next, until someone had the idea to play old radio logs recorded during patrols. Jamal's voice, rough, quiet, always steady, came through faintly from the speaker. They played one particular clip. Jamal saying, "Easy, soldier, let's head home." "Coda, you're so fortunate." Then, slowly, he walked to the speaker. He didn't eat the food laid beside it, but he sat near the voice, watched it, listened. When the voice ended, he walked away again. That evening, he did something no one expected. He left the central compound, alone, without signal, without leash. He moved through the thorny scrub and loose dirt trails as if following a scent only he could understand. Rangers watched him disappear westward, unsure if he'd return. 2 hours later, just as the sun began bleeding across the savannah, he reappeared, covered in dust, his tongue lolling slightly from exertion, but calm. He made this journey the next day, and the next, always at dusk, always alone. One of the senior rangers followed him discreetly on the 5th evening, keeping a good distance using binoculars from the trail. What he saw left him speechless. Coda had climbed the low ridge on the western edge of the reserve, a hill no one thought significant. There, at the top, he sat, still, perfectly still, facing the road Jamal's transport had taken weeks earlier, facing the last trace of his companion. He stayed for nearly an hour, watching, waiting. Then he stood, turned, and made the slow descent back. From that night onward, the pattern became legend. Coda, the dog that waited. No one could approach him for long. Attempts to reassign him to a new handler failed before they began. He ignored commands, even from seasoned trainers. He slept beneath the same tree near Jamal's old tent, but if anyone tried to leash him, he would rise and walk away, not aggressively, just gone. There was no aggression in him, only absence. He would only eat on the days someone played back Jamal's voice, and even then, only when the words were familiar. "Easy, soldier." The phrase became a password to his heart. Tourists started asking about him. "What's that dog doing up there?" they'd ask. pointing to the silhouette on the hill as the sun dipped low. Waiting, the guides would reply, their voices hushed. He waits. Some began calling it Koda's Hill. Others called him the Lone Sentinel. A few skeptics dismissed it as conditioning, a behavior loop formed from routine. But those who saw him up close, those who looked into his eyes, knew better. There was no routine in his stillness. There was longing. There was memory. There was grief. Once, during a thunderstorm, lightning cracked open the sky like a whip, and winds howled through the camp. Yet when morning came and the western trail was checked, the paw prints were there. He had gone, sat through the storm, waited in the rain, just like always. It became part of the reserve's identity. Tour guides started timing their routes so guests could glimpse Koda on the ridge at sunset. A photo of him, silhouetted against a fire-on sky, appeared in a travel magazine. Comments online said it was just a dog, but the photo itself said something else. It said, "There is a kind of loyalty that doesn't fit into science." Koda aged slowly, or perhaps time just treated him gently. His coat darkened and his gait grew more deliberate, but his eyes never dulled. They remained sharp, steady, watching. Every dusk, as the light turned gold and shadows stretched long, he made that same walk. 2 kilometers. Same trail. Same silence. One ranger once tried to meet him halfway with a leash, hoping to gently reintroduce structure. Koda stopped, sat down, refused to move until the man left. He wasn't wild. He was purposeful. The vet, an older woman named Miriam, once said, "There's no medical reason for this behavior. His vitals are good, but I think he's waiting for closure, or a ghost." And perhaps he was, because every night when the stars began to burn their slow glow above the savannah, and the wind rustled the grass like whispers through time, Koda walked alone to the ridge where he had last seen Jamal. And he waited, not because anyone told him to, not because of training or command, but because something inside him refused to forget. The weeks bled into months, and Koda's twilight pilgrimage never faltered. Rain or drought, heat wave or cold wind rolling in from the eastern hills, he would rise near the same hour and make that steady march westward. He returned just after dark, slipping like a shadow back into the quiet edges of camp, silent as ever. But then something changed. It began subtly. A crumpled piece of cloth found near his resting place. At first, no one thought much of a windblown scrap from someone's dropped laundry, perhaps. But the second time, it was a leather strap, old and worn, the kind rangers used to carry radios back when analog systems ruled. Then came the torn glove, left-handed, dark brown, frayed at the cuff. Someone recognized it from a photo of Jamal in the reserve archive, where he stood beside Koda, gloved hand resting casually over the dog's back. The realization moved through the camp in quiet murmurs. "He's bringing them back," someone whispered. Pieces of before. From that point on, rangers began watching more closely, and what they saw left them speechless. Koda was collecting, not toys, not random items, artifacts, memory. He would disappear into the scrubland during the day, deviating from his usual routine, only to return with something gently clasped in his jaws. A faded canvas pouch with a broken zipper, a tin cup with initials scraped faintly into the bottom, a sun-bleached fabric patch bearing the name Carter. They were all connected to Jamal, things he had lost, dropped, or packed away in corners of the reserve during his time there. And Koda remembered. Somehow he remembered them all. Where they had been, what they had meant. Each evening he would place them near the mapane tree by Jamal's old tent. Carefully, never chewed or mangled, always laid down with the precision of ritual. Rangers stopped touching the items. They began calling it the altar, a place of devotion, built not with prayer but with teeth and memory. It was Miriam, the camp vet, who decided to follow him discreetly one morning. She watched from a distance as Koda sniffed through dense brush near the east fence line, moving with the slow deliberation of someone searching for something they had once held but forgotten where they had left it. When he found a dented tin whistle beneath a pile of dry leaves, that whistle had hung from Jamal's pack. No one had seen it since a storm 3 years earlier. Koda carried it back like it was sacred. But what broke Miriam, and later everyone who heard her story, was what she found when she checked the ground beneath the tree Koda slept under each night. At first, it looked like a shallow depression, barely noticeable. But when she brushed away the top layer of soil and tufts of dead grass, her fingers touched fabric. Soft, frayed, familiar, she lifted it carefully. A square of old cotton, sun-stained, torn at the edges, but unmistakable in its design, a pattern of navy blue with small ivory stars, faded nearly to dust. Jamal's handkerchief, the one he was always seen with, the one he used to tie around his wrist during long patrols. It had been missing since the day he left, and now here it was, buried like treasure beneath the very place where Koda laid his head every night. Miriam said nothing at first. She simply placed the handkerchief back and recovered it gently. Word spread, and no one disturbed that spot again. The mopane tree became more than just Koda's resting place. It became a shrine. Visitors no longer tried to coax the dog into photo ops or games. Rangers began leaving offerings nearby: an old boot, a cracked compass, a bullet casing polished to shine. Items they remembered from Jamal's time. They weren't doing it for show. They were doing it because Koda had reminded them that memory isn't always held in the mind. Sometimes it's guarded by teeth, buried in dust, and brought back piece by something wild and loyal and wounded. One evening, during a red-hued dusk that smeared the horizon like fire, a young intern named Luis stood near the tree and watched Koda lay down beside his small collection. "He's not just remembering," Luis said quietly to no one in particular. "He's building something, a story only he knows." The older ranger beside him nodded. "Maybe he thinks if he brings it all back, Jamal will follow." There was a long silence. Neither one had the heart to say what they both feared, that no matter how many pieces Koda collected, some holes couldn't be filled. Still, the dog searched. Still, he brought back more. A patch of tarp from Jamal's old field tent. A metal lighter engraved with the letter J. A crack lens from the ranger binoculars they once shared. Each object came with its own weight, its own memory, and Koda bore them all without complaint. As the dry season deepened, the colors of the reserve changed from green to gold to gray. Dust clung to every surface, and the wind carried heat like a second. But Koda kept walking, kept searching, kept carrying the past between his teeth. And though no one said it aloud, many began to wonder whether he knew something they didn't, whether he could sense something stirring beyond the western hills, whether the ritual was preparing for something. The sun dipped low behind the savanna ridge, casting elongated shadows that crept slowly across the parched ground, like memories returning to claim their shape. And as he had done for nearly 2 years without fail, Koda reached the crest of the hill, settled into the dust with his front legs straight and ears upright, and stared westward toward the place where the road bent and vanished. The sky behind him lit up in swirls of crimson and gold, the kind of light that makes cameras shake in the hands of amateurs. That particular evening, a tourist named Eliza Bennett, a freelance travel blogger from Oregon, had her DSLR ready. She had been told the story during her morning safari. The silent sentinel, the morning shepherd, the dog who waited. She had scoffed at first, thinking it was a cute legend whipped up to spice up Sunset Drive. But when she saw him alone, unmoving, dignified beyond belief, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't speak. She simply filmed. A 45-second clip, no filters, no music. Just Koda against the burning African sky, ears twitching only slightly, as if waiting to hear a voice on the wind. She posted it later that night with the caption, "This dog climbs the same hill every evening at sunset. They say he's waiting for someone who never came back." Within 24 hours, the video had passed 500,000 views. Within a week, it had hit 4 million. People around the world left comments laced with crying emojis and aching wonder. Dogs don't wait that long, do they? This broke me. Who is he waiting for? Internet detectives scoured ranger blogs and found Jamal Carter's name. Someone unearthed an old photo of him and Koda from a now-defunct website run by the East Savo Wildlife Trust. The photo showed Jamal kneeling beside Koda, the same sunset ridge in the back. They looked like soldiers at ease. The story wrote itself. News outlets picked it up, first niche wildlife channels, then mainstream media. Koda was dubbed the Sunset Dog. Documentaries pitched themselves. Influencers wanted in. But the reserve had long stopped trying to explain him. "He's just waiting," they would say. "He always has." Yet not everyone believed the myth. A private security firm from Johannesburg, upon seeing Koda's discipline and calm under pressure in the viral footage, made an offer to the government agency overseeing wildlife resources. They argued that such a disciplined animal should be retrained for field security, perhaps even VIP protection. After much lobbying, permissions were granted, and within weeks, a clean-cut handler named Major DeVos arrived at the reserve to collect Koda. He brought a new leash, high-grade food, and a stack of forms signed by people who had never looked into Koda's eyes. They waited for him at dawn. He didn't resist when they took him. He didn't bark, didn't growl, but he didn't follow easily either. His paws dragged slightly, his gaze turning only once back toward the hill as the gate closed behind him. The facility they brought him to was state-of-the-art. Temperature and kennels, obstacle courses, clicker training and performance-based feeding. They tried praise, they tried firmness, they tried every technique documented in canine psychology. But Koda did not respond. He didn't sit, didn't heel, didn't run, didn't fetch. He didn't eat. Not on the first day, not the second. By the third, he had retreated into the far corner of the kennel, head down, eyes dull. They tried Jamal's voice over the intercom. It made him stand, ears perking slightly. But still, he didn't eat. By day 5, his ribs had begun to show. By day 6, he had collapsed. The facility vet declared acute emotional starvation, compounded by dehydration. On the 7th day, with no other recourse, they called the reserve. The message was simple. We think he's dying. He won't make it unless he comes home. That night, a small truck left the training center before dawn, carrying one German shepherd, wrapped in a soft blanket, monitored by 2 field medics. When they reached the reserve gates, it was nearly noon. The sun was high, scorching. A few rangers waited in silence. No one needed to speak. They opened the back hatch. Koda didn't move, but when they lifted him gently and laid him beneath the mapane tree by Jamal's old tent, something shifted. His nose twitched, the tree, the dust, the scent of old soil, and the faint imprint of footsteps long since faded. The altar of memories was still there, the glove, the pouch, the tin whistle. Slowly, impossibly, Koda lifted his head. By sunset he stood, barely, shaking, but he made the walk 2 kilometers west, one halting step at a time. Rangers watched in awe, tears in some of their eyes. He reached the ridge just as the sky caught fire, sat down with trembling legs and faced the horizon. Cameras, voices didn't reach him. He watched, because that's what he had always done. And now, more than ever, the world was watching back. After the failed retraining and Koda's near-death return, the rangers treated him with a reverence typically reserved for sacred ground. No one tried to command him anymore. No one tried to leash him. He was left alone, and in his aloneness, he became a myth. Tourists whispered when they saw him climb the ridge. Local children left small trinkets near the mapane tree, items shaped like animals or soldiers. Rangers nodded respectfully when passing him, acknowledging something far older than duty, something like grief turned into ritual. But then came James. James Onyango was 26, fresh from Ranger Academy in Nairobi, full of optimism, theory, and a deep belief in the human-animal bond. He had read about Koda before arriving, read the articles, watched the viral videos, and built in his heart a soft admiration for the creature who waited. He didn't think he could fix Koda, but he did think, maybe, just maybe, he could be his friend. The first time James approached Koda, he brought a bowl of water and a strip of sun-dried meat. He didn't speak, just crouched a few meters away and placed the items near the edge of the tree's shadow. Koda looked at him, just looked, then closed his eyes. The second time, James read aloud from a book of poetry he carried in his chest pocket, hoping the cadence might stir something. Koda didn't flinch, didn't move. The third time, James sat quietly, near enough to hear Koda's breath, far enough not to intrude. He whispered his own story about his father who never came back from the border, about a dog he had as a boy who waited for weeks after the funeral, about how some silences spoke louder than cries. Koda listened, or didn't. It was hard to tell. On the 7th day, James was helping to clean the base of the storage shed when he came across an old, dust-covered training manual tucked behind a rusted file cabinet. Inside were scribbled notes in tight handwriting, margins filled with shorthand, patrol maps, and taped Polaroids. It was Jamal's field book. James sat cross-legged in the dirt and read every page. One line kept repeating, "Triple whistle, easy soldier, responds only to that." James didn't expect much. He wasn't trying to test anything. It was evening. The sun was soft. Coda had just returned from his usual sunset vigil. He was resting near the tree, his head on his paws, body still like always. James passed by at a distance, speaking casually to another ranger. He laughed once low, soft, and then, without thinking, said, "Easy, soldier." Coda lifted his head. James froze mid-step. The other ranger stopped breathing. Coda turned his head. Slowly, deliberately, his eyes met James's. Not hostile, not fearful, just present. As if the words had pulled him out of water. James swallowed, heart thudding in his chest. He didn't approach. He didn't speak again. Coda looked a moment longer, then laid his head back down. But the message was clear. The words meant something. They still lived inside him, like a buried command line from a past life. That night, James couldn't sleep. He replayed the moment in his head 100 times. The look, the shift, the echo of recognition. The next morning he did something impulsive. He borrowed a camera from the media intern stationed at the reserve and asked permission to film Coda's evening climb just as the sun dipped low, just as the sky did its usual fire and blood transformation. James stood a fair distance, lens trained on the silhouette rising up the hill, then framed him against the horizon. The footage lasted 2 minutes. No music, no edits, just wind, dust, and Coda. At the end of the clip, James whispered the phrase, "Easy, soldier." Coda turned his head. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge. Then he returned his gaze to the road. James uploaded the video that night. He gave it a title that felt truer than any headline. "The Dog Who Remembers a Ghost." It didn't take long. Comments poured in. "That turn of the head wrecked me. What happened to the man he's waiting for? Is this real?" James didn't answer most of them, but he kept checking the view count, watching it climb. By day 3, it had reached nearly 2 million. By day 5, someone tagged Jamal Carter. Jamal had long since stopped engaging with the online world. He spent his days coordinating anti-poaching operations in the Etosha Reserve, often without signal, often too tired to scroll. But on a rare quiet evening, after a storm had knocked out patrols, he sat in the small office alone, sifting through his neglected inbox. A message caught his eye. It was from an old ranger buddy in Savo. No subject line, just a link. Jamal clicked it. The video loaded. He saw the ridge, the fire-colored sky, and then Coda. His heart stopped. He leaned forward. The camera zoomed in slightly. The same coat, the same proud posture, the same ridge. His ridge. And then, in the last 10 seconds, he heard it. The phrase, "Easy, soldier." Coda turned his... Jamal dropped the mouse. His breath caught in his throat. He hadn't spoken those words in 10 years. Yet the response was immediate. Alive. His hand trembled slightly. Not out of shock, but out of a feeling deeper than something like being found. Like a rope tugging at the edge of his chest, tying him to a place he thought had let... The moment Jamal saw the video, everything else dissolved. The dry winds of Etosha faded. The stack of reports on elephant migration routes vanished. Even the ache in his shoulder from last week's patrol disappeared beneath a rush of something fierce and undeniable. He packed that night, didn't ask for leaves, didn't fill out transfer forms. He left a note on the whiteboard in the ranger outpost, back to where it started. It took him 2 flights, 1 overnight bus, and 6 hours on a dusty motorbike loaned by a friend who didn't ask questions. Along the way, the air grew heavier, not just with emotion, but with something weathered and raw. Clouds gathered low on the horizon, thick with the promise of rain. It hadn't rained in Savo for over 40 days. Locals said the ground had forgotten the feel of softness. But that day, the sky changed, and so did the silence. Jamal arrived at the reserve just after dawn. He didn't go through the front gate. He took the narrow back trail behind the radio tower. The one he used to sneak through when he wanted time alone. The same trail where Coda had once limped beside him as a pup, one leg in splint, ears too big for his head. He walked slowly, his boots crunching on familiar gravel, heart punching against his ribs. The mapane trees swayed gently, and the hill in the distance, Coda's hill, rose out of the haze like an altar. He didn't know if Coda would be there. He didn't know if Koda would remember, but as he took his place near the base of the hill, the first drops fell light at first, gentle, then heavier. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and deep like the growl of an old god. Rain soaked his shoulders. Still, he stood. Then he did something he hadn't done in a decade. He lifted his fingers to his lips and let out a triple whistle. Short, sharp, the sound of history. Then he said it low, broken breath hitched through memory. Easy, soldier. At the top of the hill, a figure stirred. Koda had been lying there as he always did, head resting on his paws, body curled tight against the cool. The moment the whistle cut through the wind, his ears snapped upright. His head lifted. He stared toward the sound, motionless for 2 beats, maybe 3. Then his legs moved, slowly at first, then faster. No hesitation, no pause, no uncertainty. He ran not with the reckless bounce of a pup, but with the urgency of something sacred being returned. Jamal stepped forward. Water streamed down his face, soaked into his beard. His arms opened. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Koda reached him in seconds, leapt into him with the full force of a memory that had never dulled. His paws slammed against Jamal's chest, not with aggression but desperation. His body shook, not with fear but release. A deep, trembling sound came from his throat. A whimper, a cry, a language no textbook could define. Jamal dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around the wet, quivering body, pressing his face into the thick fur. "You waited," he choked. "You damn beautiful bastard, you waited." Koda licked his cheek, whined louder, his tail a blur behind him. Around them, the rain kept falling, washing the dust from the air, soaking the ground, baptizing the reunion. Rangers began to gather from the camp, drawn by the whistle, by the noise, by the impossible. Some stood in silence, others covered their mouths. Miriam, the vet, wept openly. James, standing near the edge of the tree line, captured none of it on video. He just watched, hand over heart, knowing some moments weren't meant for the internet. They were meant for the soul. Jamal stood slowly, Koda still pressed against his side. Together they walked toward the camp. No leash, no command, just step for step, breath for breath. People cleared a path. Jamal didn't explain. He didn't need to. That night they gave him back his old tent, the one beside the mapane tree. Inside, it looked the same, a little smaller maybe, a little quieter. Koda curled up on the same corner mat, now threadbare from years of waiting. Jamal sat on the cot, elbows on knees, staring at him in disbelief. "You never gave up," he said. Koda looked back, eyes. That night, the rain fell without pause. It soaked the earth, filled the dry riverbeds, turned dust into mud and silence into rhythm. And in the dark, 2 hearts once broken by distance beat again in sync, as if no time had passed at all. For the first time in years, Jamal stayed without needing to explain himself. The camp offered him guest quarters, but he chose instead to sleep in his old tent beside the mopane tree, where the ground still remembered the weight of his boots and the shade still held the shape of his past. In those first few days, he and Koda settled into a rhythm that didn't have to be spoken aloud. Each morning they woke together, Jamal rising stiffly with the quiet creak of knees worn by time and terrain. Koda slower but steady, his limbs stiff but his eyes bright. They ate in silence, shared the same patch of light near the canteen, and returned to the trails. Jamal, with his field knife and notebook, Koda with nose to ground, his tail flicking now and then like punctuation in a sentence only they understood. Younger rangers often watched from a distance, not daring to interrupt. It felt like watching a ritual from another era. They moved through the bush without needing signals. When Jamal paused, Koda sat. When Jamal turned, Koda followed. And each evening, as if the universe itself had conspired to grant them this echo of a former life, they climbed the western ridge together. No leash, no command, just step for step, side by side, like soldiers returning to a familiar trench. At the top, Jamal would sit on the same flat rock, now cracked deeper than he remembered, and Koda would curl beside him, his breath rhythmic, slow. They would watch the sun fall like a blessing across the horizon, the sky erupting in orange, blood red, and deep violet. Jamal didn't speak during those sunsets. He didn't have to. Sometimes his hand would rest lightly on Koda's back, fingers brushing the coarse fur like a prayer. Other times, they simply sat. One day, James approached carefully and asked Jamal if he would consider staying longer, maybe returning as senior advisor. Jamal smiled without looking away from the setting sun. "I'll stay as long as he does," he said. The 2 weeks passed like a dream. The days were warm, soft-edged, filled with a quiet kind of joy that doesn't need celebration to feel complete. But Jamal noticed it, the small shifts, the way Kota rose more slowly, the way his breathing deepened at night, becoming labored in the early morning hours, the way he sometimes lagged behind, just by a few paces, as if the weight of all the waiting had begun to wear him down. Jamal didn't mention it. He simply adjusted, slowed his own stride, carried a soft cloth to wipe Kota's paws after long walks, left water nearer to their sleeping mat. The night it happened, the air was cool, windless, the sky spangled with stars so bright they seemed to... At first, Jamal thought he was simply tired, curled in the usual position. But when he crouched beside him, he saw the difference. Kota's eyes opened, but he didn't rise. His legs twitched slightly, but they didn't push through. Jamal ran a hand over his side, then met the gaze that had never changed, steady, patient, unafraid. "You still want to go up?" Jamal asked softly. Kota didn't make a sound, but his head shifted toward the west, toward the trail. That was enough. Jamal wrapped a blanket around Kota's body, lifted him gently like he had years ago when he was just a limping pup with a stitched leg and 2 big ears. The years had added weight, muscle turned to stillness, but Jamal carried him anyway, step by step. The climb took longer now. The rocks had eroded in places, the trail narrower than he remembered, but the way forward was still marked by memory. Jamal's breath grew shallow halfway up, but he didn't stop. He didn't curse the wind or the incline. He didn't speak, he just kept moving. At the summit, he laid Kota down gently on the... Jamal sat beside him, arms draped loosely over bent knees, his eyes on the horizon though the sun had long since set. Beside him, Kota's breath came slower, each exhale spaced wider apart, but his body was calm. Jamal didn't cry. Not then. He didn't whisper promises. He didn't ask him to stay. He simply reached over and let his hand rest on Kota's shoulder. Feeling the faint pulse, the silence wrapped around them like an old coat familiar, frayed, heavy with youth. Neither of them moved. They just sat there together, high above the world, with nothing between them but wind and time, and the soft echo of a whistle that once meant come home. The wind at dawn whispered like a lullaby through the branches above the ridge, stirring the first light into thin ribbons that stretched slowly across the sky. Jamal stirred beneath the blanket, limbs stiff, his back aching from the uneven ground. But he didn't move at first. His right arm was numb, and for a brief moment he thought it was just the cold, just the long night under stars. But when he shifted slightly and looked down, he saw Kota's head resting on his forearm, still and heavy, exactly like it used to when they camped in the field a decade ago. Before distance, before silence, before waiting had carved its years into them. Something in the stillness told him what the truth already knew. Kota's chest no longer rose. His breath had quieted sometime in the night, slipped into the dark without a sound, without a struggle. Just like everything about him, gentle, strong, faithful until the very end. Jamal didn't speak. He didn't cry, not right away. He just sat there, motionless, one hand slowly curling over Kota's shoulder, feeling the warmth still faint in the fur, letting the weight of loss descend not like a storm but like fog, slow and inescapable. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The sun rose behind them, gilding the trees below, casting long shadows from the rocks. The camp was still asleep. The world hadn't noticed yet what it had lost. When Jamal finally moved, it was with the solemn care of a man handling something holy. He wrapped Kota in the old ranger jacket he had brought with him, faded green, edges fraying, the one that still smelled faintly of sweat, earth, and the pack. He carried him down the ridge in silence, not as a body but as a brother, as someone returning home. Near the base of the hill, beneath the ancient baobab that had stood longer than memory, Jamal began to dig. He didn't ask for help. He didn't need ceremony. Only space. Only earth. His hands blistered. His breath came ragged. But he didn't stop until the hole was deep enough, wide enough, worthy enough. He placed Kota down gently, his head turned west, facing the path he had watched for 10 years. the road Jamal had once disappeared down and finally returned from. Then, before covering him, Jamal reached into his pack and pulled out the handkerchief navy blue with fading stars that Koda had once buried beneath the mapane tree. He folded it carefully and tucked it beneath the dog's chin. "You kept it?" he whispered. "Now I'll keep you." When the final layer of soil had been packed, Jamal sat back and breathed slowly, staring at the mound, at the tree, at the sky that now felt too wide. The camp had awakened by then. A few rangers approached quietly, their faces drawn with respect and grief. James stood furthest back, hat in hand, eyes low. No one spoke. They simply watched as Jamal reached for the flat stone he had set aside earlier and pressed it into the soil at the head of the grave. The chisel in his hand moved with calm precision, one line at a time, each letter slow, final. When he was done, he leaned back, read it aloud once, not as an epitaph but as a promise. Koda, the one who waited, not a dog, a friend, a home. No one added anything more. There was nothing else to say. In the days that followed, people from nearby villages brought flowers, old dog tags, painted stones. Tourists left notes. Children drew sketches and tucked them under the branches. Someone built a small bench nearby. Another planted wildflowers, but Jamal, he visited alone, at dusk, sitting in the silence with his hands folded in his lap, letting the light fade the way it had 1,000 times beside the one who had waited for him every single night. Sometimes he would whistle 3 short notes, not calling, just remembering. And sometimes, just before the stars came out, he would swear he heard the soft padding of paws in the dirt behind him, the rustle of movement, the breath of something familiar close by. He never turned to look. He didn't need to. He knew the sound by heart, and he knew that some loyalties don't end. They simply wait somewhere just beyond the wind, just beyond the trail, just beyond the last goodbye. If this story moved you even just a little, take a second to like the video and subscribe for more stories that speak straight to the heart. We'd love to know what part of Koda and Jamal's journey hit you the hardest. Was it the long wait, the silent reunion, or something else entirely? Also, tell us where you're watching from. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and let's see how far this story has traveled.